President and CEO of Equity in the Center. And it is my pleasure to be here this afternoon with Maggie Popchuk, a member of Equity in the Center's board and an advisor since the beginning of time in terms of EIC's history, and also one of the co-founders of racialequitytools.org. EIC was privileged in 2024 to adopt RET, so now we operate it. And we're here today to talk a bit about its founding, the resources. There are more than 5,000 racial equity tools and resources indexed in the library, and they're all available at no cost. So Maggie's going to tell us a little bit about the founding of racialequitytools.org, which was intended to fill a gap, and how filling that gap is particularly meaningful at this moment in time for equity and justice work. So Maggie, I'll toss it over to you to share more.
Thanks, Kay. And what a treat just to be on the call with you and have a chance to have an afternoon chat.
Yes, some good trouble.
Yes. So before RET, the first site was actually Evaluation Tools for racialequity.org, and it was created back in 2005. And you know this, Kay, evaluation and racial equity were typically not in the same sentence.
No.
Cultural competency was used. So on the site, and when I talk about we, it's me and Sally Lederman at CAPD, we had one tab that focused on racial equity. But what we did for that site is we brought together a bunch of different community groups who piloted the evaluation tools, discussed their needs, and they were the ones, after it was launched, that we heard about this gap, about needing a clearinghouse and needing to find the information, and not just find resources and tools, but tools with quality and integrity that went with it. Mm-hmm. So we did a survey at the time to learn more what folks wanted. And, as you know, this is now between 2005 and 2009. 2009 is when we officially launched Racial Equity Tools as a companion to Evaluation Tools. Okay. But at that time, just to remind folks that might be listening, that's around Hurricane Katrina. And it was when the National Environmental Justice for All Tour was talking about the toxic contamination that was happening. It was also when Sean Bell was murdered right before his wedding day, along with 3 other African-American men by the NYPD. And when National Domestic Workers Alliance was happening, was launched, the subprime mortgage, and as well as Barack Obama being elected. So a lot of things were happening. So there was almost an explosion of resources and doubling of different organizations. And fortunately, Annie Casey and Mott both supported the development of the companion site. And then in 2016, Sally and I, along with Shakti Butler, who's an amazing filmmaker and facilitator, she had a site called Racial Equity Learning. So we merged all 3 sites together. And then in 2020, we were forced to move to another platform. But again, how we filled that gap is we had over 300 responses to a survey that said, this is what I need. This is the content. This is the process that'll make it most searchable for us. Mm-hmm. And so we added many different categories. We have what we call 98 bookcases at that time. And, it was on language justice and racial capitalism and anti-Blackness. But the 2 consistent things, and I know, well, you know this, is important. One, for the resources to be free, because folks did not want to have to deal with that, and to be sure that the integrity of the content. So when we curate any resources, we are looking for explicit language on racial equity analysis, a conceptual understanding of structural racism, power, and privilege. And as you said, we now have over 5,000 resources. And I'm just delighted that Equity in the Center adopted it and is now managing it. And it's just great to see the changes that are already being made. So it's good to be on this call.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's been a learning journey and a privilege to hold the work at this sort of critical time. I don't want to say unprecedented because it's now been precedented for some time. And as we look at Equity in the Center stakeholders, as well as folks in the RET stakeholder base, many of them no longer have access to institutional resources or budgets to support race equity capacity building, whether it be in the community, like in movement or in an organization. So the no cost aspect of racial equity tools is particularly important. How do you think that having the access, not having the resources, not have the barrier to access that a cost often presents, how do you think that contributes to stronger movements and makes communities and organizations more resilient, particularly in terms of making them more equitable?
Yeah. Well, especially as you said right now, with the funds that have been cut by so many nonprofits, especially many in the racial justice field, and folks, the attacks are happening, the pressure to be explicit in naming what is happening, and even shutting down one analysis about racism and oppression. And obviously, we saw it on this holiday that just passed in terms of how history is getting shut down. So the importance of having a one-stop shop where the curation is trusted, folks don't have to use limited funding for resources and tools. They can connect and know what's going on across the country and beyond the USA, and also to deepen their work. I would say another thing is also with that level of access, we know that people and organizations feel like they're not alone to do the heavy lifting of working for justice. They can learn about what innovation is happening in different communities and the progress on different issues. And that work is surviving, right? And organizations are continuing to be explicit in their language. One of the other things with RET too is, I think many sites do this, and we've talked about this before, is there's like a coastal privilege in terms of who gets to see those organizations that are primarily on the coast. And one of the things with RET that we were very intentional about is making sure what was happening in the South and what was happening in the Midwest was present, especially when you look at having diverse case studies, as well as there's a section on many of the pages called key sites. So you get to see organizations that are on the ground doing the work in that area. And many of them are not from the coast.
No. And folks from around the world use the site, which I think once we adopted RET and we were able to see the back end in terms of where the hits were coming from, it's not just a resource for people in the continental US, it's a resource for folks in Canada and Mexico and Europe and Asia, which was surprising because we tend to think of the work in our own domestic context, but it is used as a resource by folks around the world, more than 70,000 unique users in 2025. And it's also a resource for journalists who use it as a source for citations when they're reporting on an issue related to disparities. And when we published Awake to Woke to Work back in 2018, we tried to richly hyperlink the paper so that people had examples of the things as we talked about them. And the majority of the hyperlinks came from RET's library. So we've been connected for quite some time. I did want to direct folks to the CARE page on RET, which is Countering Attacks on Racial Equity. We also have it in the resources section of the Equity in the Center website, but you'll find it on RET's website. And essentially, it's just a suite of tools that we curated to support folks in navigating pushback that they may be getting from their board, from their colleagues, from their community, from their funders around how to navigate this moment. And as Maggie said, many of us have lost funding. Many folks have lost their roles, which we have been able to see quite plainly in the bounce backs that we get from the RET and Equity in the Center subscription list, that folks have lost administrative roles that focused on equity, or sort of functional roles that focused on equity. But others have also been able to persist, often by using tools that they find on RET, by shifting their language, or by just continuing to do what it was that they've always been doing, but not talking so publicly about it. And thanks to our colleague Tanaja, who dropped the link to the CARE page in the chat. My next question is, for folks who may feel overwhelmed by the current moment, which is a season, at this point. Where would you recommend that they begin on RET? And if you could give a bit of insight into folks coming into the work from different points. So for example, someone who's a member of the community, someone who's working in movement versus someone who's working in an institution or an organization and potentially maybe even a consultant. Like in your experience, how have you seen folks entering the work at different levels engaging with RET's resources? Like how do they use them and what does it help them to accomplish?
Yeah. So I have a couple of different ideas that I want to share. And first, though, I'm going to go personal because we're all feeling overwhelmed at this time in terms of what's happening. And I appreciate your framing of the season in terms of what's happening right now. So I'm going to be putting a few links in the chat. And I guess being overwhelmed personally and organizationally, one of the new one of the new pages we offered was in the issues section and was trauma, violence, and healing. And it was, how do you understand the concepts and the impact? And you'll see what's going into the chat. I also included two resources from that page. One is from the National Equity Project on just understanding the levels of healing around individual, interpersonal, and institutional. And another one is a great piece, and Kelly Hayes from Truth Out, who's done a series, definitely check her out, has done one on care in terms of a collective practice of survival. Then again, in the strategy section is, and let me just put this in as well. In the strategy section, so this is how do you address it? So when you're seeing trauma in the workplace, when you know that there's a need for healing in the workplace, you'll see that there's lots of different resources that are available. But two, again, that I wanted to pull out was one by Prentice Hemphill and Nonprofit Quarterly, who did this, I think it was 2 years ago, that it was written about transforming our systems and ourselves. And then Ajaris Dixon, again, somebody that people need to listen to. There's a podcast that they also have, but this one's about community safety at this time. So encourage folks to check that out as they take care of themselves. And the other piece I want to go to, and this is what I think you were specifically asking for, Kay, is when folks are starting, and you might be overwhelmed, like 5,000 resources. Oh my gosh, how am I going to get through that? I don't have time to read the newspaper today. So one thing that I encourage folks to do is to go to the sitemap and just peruse all the categories. Just take 5 minutes and take a look at what are the different ones that you saw that I just mentioned. Issues, there's ones on food justice and environmental justice, and voting and democracy, as well as about community change and community assessments, samples of those. So take a look at that. And then when you're ready to actually say, I need some resources on a specific topic, like organizational change, then I invite you to go to the search tips. And this is a document, and I have to do a shout out to Josephine Drew, who created this. This will, I encourage you, will lessen your frustration searching for something in particular. And let's be clear, the search has gotten better, but it's not a Google search or a DuckDuckGo search. So this will help you know what this search is capable for and how best to access it, whether it's a organization, or it's a topic that you like to learn more about. But part of it is thinking about, what am I needing right now? Do I want to increase my knowledge and understanding? Well, then go to the first major tab, which is fundamentals, and you'll learn all about racial equity and structural racism and intersectionality. And then if you want to figure out in terms of the issues and sort of what's happening and what's been the progress, then go to the issues tab. And then to go to planning, which will take you to the strategy that you want to go forward on. So those are a couple things. And if folks want to put anything in chat in terms of specific questions, we're happy to answer those.
Well, thanks so much, Maggie. I know colleagues of mine, like when I hear folks talk about how they use the site, they use it in the way that you described. So like I'm looking for a particular thing, so I might go to fundamentals if I'm trying to like bring a board up to speed, or if I'm onboarding a new colleague, or if I am looking for a framework or a template or an example of an assessment, because I want to either make the case to my organization that we should do one, or because I have been told that I need to do one. It gives me a place to start. So going to the search bar and searching for what you're looking for is a great strategy, or sort of perusing the sections as you described. We do find that folks also, like of the 70,000 people who end up on the site looking for something in particular, they do often enter the site through Google search, because they just went to, if they don't know about RET, they went to Google looking for something, and then most of the initial returned results are from RET. So that's another path that folks take in. And in the past couple of years, we definitely have had colleagues using the healing resources that you began with. So, I mean, those of us who work with one another on a daily basis know that in meetings, folks are frequently overwhelmed by current events. So even the ability to just be grounded and sort of your nervous system operating at a level where you can engage in a conversation about like whatever the business of the day is. Folks have had difficulty getting to that place. And so I know they've used the resources that you shared initially to sort of ground folks in the moment, to also give them some additional resources outside of work as we just continue to try to process as like sentient beings navigating the world. And then some tools that they can use in their work together so that they are feeling as healed as possible, you know, under the circumstances. But RET is a great library to use often when you're not sure how to approach a particular topic or how to engage an audience on a topic. There are a number of things that you can pull and share, and we often suggest that folks just follow up with individuals by sharing resources from the library. So we talked about potentially doing a racial equity audit or building a framework that centers community power. Like, here are examples of what that looks like. And as Maggie stated earlier, there are lots of benefits of RET, but I think for myself as a user at the very beginning, it was the rigor that is applied to curating the site, so that when you go, you know, this isn't someone who just sort of threw something together. Like, all of the tools are created by folks who've been working in this space for decades, and are trusted partners and experts in this work. One section I did want to flag are the solidarity resources, which we will often highlight in the newsletter and the cover note when it comes out. And I want to give a shout out to our colleague, Pawan Halkari, who started gathering those resources together, similar to the trauma and healing resources, because folks are sort of struggling for connection and answers and a way forward. And so the solidarity resources help by providing like tools and resources and examples of how we can show up for one another in these challenging times. And they don't necessarily fit into one of the issue areas around which RET is organized, around which the whole library is organized, but it's been a good, solid resource for folks to rely on, particularly as they come into relationship with folks, and just to say, like, here is an option for us to think about how to show up as allies on any number of issues. And for Equity in the Center in particular, our work historically, in terms of why we were founded, was to serve leaders in organizations primarily. And RET is an exciting resource for us to have adopted and to curate, because the stakeholder base is wider, and also because it serves movement. It provides the opportunity to share tools and resources that are very explicit about certain racial and social justice issues, not just in the United States, but abroad. So, for example, the Israel-Gaza war over the past few years. Tools and resources related to that we've shared often on RET, and that's sort of outside of the scope of EIC's more organizational framework. So that's another reason why we recommend it to folks who are in organizations. Like, there are lots of tools that you can apply within your own team, but also just in your life and your work more broadly if you're trying to show up as an ally for folks.
And Kay, just one other quick thing, because I love that you brought up the care page that Equity in the Center added last year. And I just want folks, I mean, there's 8 different sections on this. There's analysis, there's data, there's history and conceptual, the legal issues, narrative and messaging, as well as what are the tools to counter those attacks. So if you want really a one-stop about what's going on right now, and the resources are from some brilliant folks that have put that together, as well as some of the data guides. I just want folks to really make sure they're bookmarking care, and so they have that accessible.
Oh, thanks, Maggie. As we're talking about all the challenges that folks are navigating right now, I'm wondering, like, what gives you hope as you look at how individuals are utilizing tools on RET, as your colleagues are creating tools and resources that end up indexed on RET? Like, what's giving you hope in this moment?
Well, I have to start. In 2020, the traffic on RET shot up 300%. And the most important thing is that has been sustained, right? Mm. And so that's important. People are wanting to know what to do and how to do it. And then what you mentioned earlier, Kay, was also the journalism sites. We got The Guardian, the New York Times, BBC, CNN, NIH are referencing resources on RET, as well as hundreds of organizations. And I did a quick search on Google yesterday to see how many pages it comes up where RET is listed on an organization as part of their resource list. And so there's hundreds of organizations that are doing it, but the most popular page is the glossary. And I think we were tickled pink, as the saying goes, when the Atlantic mentions the RET glossary about the power is immense and how it influences highly educated folks in terms of changing the language and making it more mainstream. And so that was from an article from George Packer. And the number of organizations, what also is exciting is how many organizations are their resources and tools and case studies are on the site. When we started back in 2009, there was, maybe, I don't want to misrepresent, maybe 100 organizations and less than that had resources and tools on it. And now there's so many folks that are on it, and it speaks loudly to what has been accomplished, what the field has accomplished, and how they're sharing it. So I think it speaks volumes of the progress, and that gives me lots of hope about how this site has grown and where it can go.
Yeah, no, that is a point of hope, because even as we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, like, folks have lost their institutional roles, and we can see that because we know that's happening with our colleagues, but also when we get bounce backs from the newsletter. But the work continues, and all of the hits on the website continue. So while we definitely have folks in both of our networks, like EIC and RET, whose roles have been defunded, the work continues, whether folks are in an organization or not, and whether an organization often officially has sanctioned the work publicly. Like, right. Initiatives that were in place have continued at many organizations, sometimes under a different name, sometimes just continuing without saying anything about it to see how long they can keep going. And lots of folks have been able to continue unfettered, which is really encouraging. What do you think about the future of RET, and what emerging needs do you see among leaders and organizations?
I think one of the areas that has received minimum investment by the philanthropic sector is a communication and community infrastructure to consistently support not only the capacity building network, but also in terms of how we are sharing different things. RET has done a lot on a very, very, very small budget, but this is the time to ensure that RET can and will play a leading role in this communication and community structure. When we talk about the fight for democracy and elections, it's imperative that we have a strong communication loop and a clearinghouse of information to strengthen. As we see how all the different state legislation goes, we need to be tapping that and knowing what's happening so we can be proactive in our state and our community. And I think RET is an important source to connect the dots of that vital information. So, for me, I think it's vital and critical at this juncture for RET to be fully funded, which means equity in the center needs to be supported to build the bench so folks can be more responsive to the requests of the field. So for folks who have used it and helped them out with something, I hope folks will consider that moving forward. I do want to sort of close on this. We've been reading a lot about the 89 million, right, who didn't vote, and the importance, obviously, of everyone to vote for a democracy based on justice. And Ashley Henderson has written about this in her blog in Medium, and we'll put the chat in just a moment. But they said people anticipate what the regime would repress, and they begin to self-censor preemptively without being asked to. The movement strategy version is we pull tactics from our toolbox before the regime ever lifts a finger to repress them. And then closes out by talking about Hardy Merriman's civil resistance tradition, which tells us conditions don't determine outcomes. Skills do, strategic choices do, unity, planning, and discipline do. So RET is so important for folks to have free access to that toolbox to help us do our work, and considering that there's sections on making the case, community organizing, community engagement, resistance and retrenchment. All of those sections are already on RET, and how to make sure folks have access to it. And also knowing there's lots of organizations who do not have the bandwidth or the resources to share their brilliant work that they're doing. So how are we capturing that so we're not losing out on that brilliance? And so that's why it's really important for our RET to be supported at this time.
Yes, now more than ever. Thanks for sharing that and for reviewing how many options we do have in this season. I feel like often colleagues, and then I think I've been caught up in it at various moments, just like everyone else, like the feeling of like, oh, well, what are we going to do? There's nothing new about the playbook that is being worked over the past couple of years. And there's also nothing new about how movement can root themselves in strategy and tools and rigor to push back. And obeying in advance is not where we need to go. And it has been, I think, the knee-jerk response for many folks, even those who are connected to movement and in racial and social justice organizations, because they don't necessarily feel that all the resources you describe are available to them. And so the more investment we're able to get to spread the word and make sure that RET is as accessible as possible, and driving engagement among younger users and making sure that the resources are out on platforms that folks are using and engaging with is a big part of that. So it's something that we're thinking about as we continue to fundraise. Any closing thoughts beyond what you've shared?
Just have fun exploring. Go to the site, explore, go through it, see the sitemap, and just have fun, and then send that link on to someone else.
Thank you. Yes. And I do often find among colleagues when we have conversations about RET, that is often how folks learn about it, beyond searching on the internet or seeing it referenced in an article that they read. A colleague sent them something from RET or suggested it to them as a trusted resource. It's like, if you're trying to figure this out, this is a great place to go and find out what's out there. So you don't have to recreate the wheel, because now more than ever, in terms of constrained budgets and dwindling staff, no one has the time to create things from scratch. But where we are is there's nothing new under the sun in terms of the season we're in at the moment. And so there are a wealth of tools and resources that you can use in organizations and in community, and then for yourself as an individual in terms of just healing and navigating and managing in this moment, that are in the library. So thank you so much, Maggie, for taking time to share about your journey in RETs and helping folks understand how to utilize the platform to get what they need out of it as we move through this season in solidarity.
Thanks for having me. It's been a treat to be on this with you and just catch up as well.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Wishing everyone a great rest of the day. Happy summer.
Take care.
Bye.